Terra Graziani are here with you along with Chad and Abby. We're going to be sort of doing a behind the scenes look at how you put together a meeting or meeting series like Movement Building from Home. We'll start by introducing ourselves. You all know Chad and Abby, so but we'll ask them to introduce themselves first. And yeah, let's go ahead and start the stream if we can. Farah?
Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, kicking off today's call, which is the special bonus episode from the Movement Building from Home series. If you have not already, please add your name to the check-in or the roll call at the top of today's meeting notes, which Abby continues to share in the chat, in the Zoom chat. So again, my name is Jessica Meyerson. I'm from Educopia Institute. I'm the Director for Research and Strategy there. My colleague Terra Graziani is co-hosting today's bonus episode with me. We're going to start by asking Chad and Abby to introduce themselves, although I know you all know them very well. And then Terra and I will give you some background on who we are and where we come from and how we approach this work of community facilitation. So Chad, Abby?
All right. Hey, great to see you all. I'm Chad Sansing. I work at Mozilla, in particular on facilitator and newcomer support for MozFest, and I also work on other community programs like Movement Building from Home. Abby?
Hi, I'm Abby. It's good to see a lot of your faces again. It's always nice to see you all on the big screen on Zoom. Yeah, I'm working on Open Practice Lead at MozFest and working a lot on developer engagement for MozFest, also an open source and trustworthy AI.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chad and Abby. So I'll ask Terra Graziani, again, my colleague from Educopia Institute, to introduce herself and share a little bit about how she comes to this work of community facilitation and organizing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Terra Graziani. I'm a research program officer at Educopia Institute. And I have a background in community organizing around issues of housing and tenants' rights. And with Educopia, I am, a research program officer doing research and thinking about ways to bring our community cultivation model, which Jess will talk about in just a second, to all the communities that we support in our work.
Excellent. Thank you, Terra. Again, my name is Jessica Meyerson. I'm the Director for Research and Strategy at Educopia Institute, where we collectively work to coordinate and support collaborative communities of practice. Many of you represent members of those communities on this call today. So at Educopia, we have three primary domain areas that we work in terms of community cultivation. That's scholarly communication or knowledge sharing and dissemination, digital curation, and then community cultivation more broadly. And within that, some of the work that we do is we consult with many different institutions and organizational types within information stewardship more broadly. So we do consulting work. We also do actual community facilitation and provide both fiscal and administrative hosting for several communities of practice, including Meta Archive, the Library Publishing Coalition, the Big Curator Consortium, and we're currently in a seed-funded period or sort of a hosted incubation runway period for a community called the Software Preservation Network. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chad for the CPG reminder.
Hey, and yes, of course, we are all here together under the Mozilla Community Participation Guidelines. So that means we'll be respectful, honest, inclusive, accommodating, appreciative, and open to learning from everyone else. And we will not attack, demean, disrupt, harass, or threaten others, or encourage any such behavior. As always, if you're curious about the full CPG, you can follow the link near line 86 or so at the top of page 3, it looks like. And if there's any issue you'd like to report or anything you'd like to discuss further about the CPG, please do reach out to Abby or me. Abby, you want to talk about our goals?
Yeah. So goals for this special bonus episode, we do want to share approaches to the design and the delivery of these calls. And to answer these frequently asked questions about the calls. A lot of people have been asking how we did this or how we came up with this thought. And we want to help people adopt helpful methods in their own community management practices. So I think we'll jump straight into the Q&A section. Jessica and Terra.
All right, so we're going to start this question off with Abby, and then Chad, please do chime in. But how did the two of you come up with the idea for the series itself?
Actually, I think Chad came up with it originally, so it's funny that you're starting with me. But I think it did start as a kind of work from home approach, just as people were suddenly working from home. I know we had done a blog post and a pretty popular Twitter thread around like tips around how we organize meetings that people really responded well to. So we knew that there was a need for this. And then the shift to movement building from home, we saw that a lot of people were suddenly organizing conferences online or suddenly trying to maintain their large communities and movements online. And we thought that could be a unique place where we could help, because a lot of people were talking about like how to set up your workspace at home, like more specifics around working. But I think the movement building piece we were really interested in. Chad, anything to add?
No, I would say that all sounds absolutely right. I think we were and continue to be really sensitive to what's going on in the world and in our community, and folks' needs for learning how to maybe scale up this kind of work if they've been doing it before, how to start this work if it's something entirely new, or just to find a like-minded community to kind of be present with and to share not only best practices for managing this kind of work, but best practices for caring for ourselves and others as we get through it. So all of that seemed very important. It seemed like we had an opportunity to offer something based on our own experience with organizing online training over the past several years. And we had a bit of a runway in that we had already decided at that point, because we were moving kind of our largest event, MozFest, from London to Amsterdam for the next MozFest. We'd already decided that we would do that in March of 2021. So as we were thinking about, reimagining that festival, we had a little bit of space we found to think of how to run a program like this. And we just kind of picked it up and ran with it.
Thanks so much, Abby and Chad. That's actually a great segue into the next question. Terra, take it away.
Yep. So this question is a little bit more about any sort of models or communities that have given you resources that inspired this series. So can you each start by talking a little bit about how you come to this work doing community facilitation? Chad, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I began my career as a middle school educator for 14 years. So that means I've spent a lot of my professional career working with 11 to 14-year-olds every day. And at different times in that career and different points of my own understanding about kind of the nature of learning and agency and selfhood, might have been asking them to do some things, cajoling them to do some things, and then ultimately just trying to work with them to find out what it is they wanted to do, how we could accomplish it together. So a certain part of my interest in kind of learning organizations and cultures as places where people self-organize for self-directed learning and to accomplish their own goals came from becoming a more democratic educator over time and figuring out where all the kind of like blind spots were in the control mechanisms of public education in the United States to do a little more student-owned and authentic work. And then I came to Mozilla and I was working on curriculum development for web literacy and had a number of collaborators, but I would say that work kind of like served a web literacy community, and certainly got a lot of feedback from it, but wasn't focused necessarily on movement building or organizing or activism in ways that we might talk about it. And as that work kind of cycled down and the strategic focus of the Mozilla Foundation shifted, I joined the Open Leadership and Events team, which is now the MozFest team, and just got a lot of kind support and invitations from my colleagues on that team to plug into open leadership work that they've been doing. And I just tried to bring kind of my own sense of curriculum design to that work and thinking about, how to frame some things from my own curiosities in terms of like learning cultures, culture change, and tried to make contributions like the culture track to the already existing Open Leaders program. And really just tried to follow Abby's lead and how she was interacting with coaching, mentoring, leading this community, and to make the contributions I could while I was, learning to do more and more there. And then we got here, where after several rounds of working on the Open Leaders program together and Open Leaders X, which was a train the trainers program to help people run their own open leadership programs, we got to this point where we had this opportunity to do like a responsive course design together.
Cool. And Abby, how did you come to this work?
Yeah, yes, I actually have a background in like computer science and bioinformatics, and that seems at odds with some of the facilitation community organizing. But when I was in university studying computer science, I did a lot of community organizing with student groups. And it was really exciting for me to like mobilize students to get excited about different causes and watch these groups grow and really change the culture on campus. So when I came to Mozilla, it was interesting to see how Mozilla was able to do this in an online setting, which I hadn't really been exposed to before, how they were able to run meetings in this really participative way that really like actually transformed how people were thinking and got people excited about things like the open web, open leadership. So taking lessons from like both of those worlds, Open Leaders started with the science group first, and then Chad talked a little bit about how it's grown and expanded since. And I think there's a few people from Open Leaders X here. And that's the path I've taken. Since then, another thing that's really influenced my facilitation was Rockwood leadership training. Chad and I both went to a few years ago. But that was really transformative, and just thinking how they have this course called The Art of Leadership, and just different practices to really help your facilitation. It's really influenced how I think.
Nice. So just to follow up on that, are there any, you mentioned a few like Rockwood, but are there any other specific like communities, professional communities of facilitators that you are either part of or that you've learned from that folks on this call might gravitate towards?
I might second Rockwood. I know they are moving Art of Leadership online and looking for a few other kinds of program designs that they might try to deliver that way as well, which is very exciting. Recommend that wholeheartedly. There's an educational group in the United States called the National Writing Project that I think is an excellent model of kind of a self-organizing system that's really dedicated to agency and empowerment of the people that it serves. Fab Writers is an organization run by a friend of MozFest, Dirk Slater, that does kind of what we might think of as participatory leadership design, facilitative leadership design, that I think is just great, and works with many of our allies over time in the internet health and trustworthy AI movements. And I guess maybe like in addition to those things, I just look to a lot of folks working in similar spaces who are also doing movement building work and convening people, like Allied Media Conference, RightsCon, SourceCon, Internet Freedom Festival, things like
that. Just to plus one everyone that Chad mentioned, but I know that both Fab Writers and Aspiration Tech have really shaped how MozFest is run in that participatory, and what's the other word they use a lot?
Federated
way. Yes.
Federated design. Yes.
Yes. They've really changed what happens at MozFest, which is exciting. I know for the science community, the Carpentries has really shaped how I think about teaching or just facilitation in general. So those would be my adds to that. Cool.
And just making sure we didn't miss anything you wanted to add about your own facilitation techniques. Is there any specific background on how you developed your style of facilitation that you want to share here? Abby?
This is a good question. I should have read these questions beforehand. I think Rockwood changed a lot, and it was more about holding space and letting the participants sort of discover a learning there rather than us teaching or just like saying what you should know, like letting them discover that was nice. And lots of exercises to help people understand that. Chad, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think part of the arc of my journey in given how much privilege I have in the world, has definitely been just like learning to stop and listen and be open to feedback about how to do things better, and understanding that, let's say, even if you give your best, that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't something better out there. It also doesn't mean that you can't like get there with some humility and some practice. So I think maybe the most important facilitative practice for me is just thanking people for the patience that it sometimes takes to get me to shift or to try something new. But generally what I try to do is to look at like really the high water moments, like the peaks of successful facilitative experiences I've either experienced or have helped deliver in the past, and then to make what I think are my best bets about how to use the characteristics of those things to create new experiences, along with the idea of, as we did in movement building from home, providing time after every convening for feedback and asking people what worked, so we can make sure to continue that, and then what didn't work, so we can make sure to change that in as real time as possible. And I think that's something also that came from being a public educator, and that if you were teaching 4 of the same classes a day for 90 minutes at a time with 12-year-olds and it didn't work the first time, you really needed to change it before the second time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you both for sharing all of that. So we're going to move on to the next question about really like the design of this particular kind of community convening. So first, I wanted to ask you both about how you set the tone from the planning stages to the actual convenings. And we have here questions about, communications, how you've like learned from the past, making sure everyone has all the information they need. And then there were specific questions from participants about protective measures against disruptive behavior. So I wondered if you both could talk a little bit about setting the tone and setting expectations for this series. Chad, do you want to start?
Yeah. I think we're fortunate in that we have been able to work on similar programs in the past together for a while now. And it's helped us, I think, and Abby, correct me if I'm wrong, like develop a kind of vocabulary for talking about like, oh, let's try to make it this many calls, this long, these kinds of items. These seem like the top 5 topics to me. What about to you? And we can reach consensus relatively quickly and about not only content, but how we might deliver something based on practice that we've had. And so I just want to suggest that kind of like team facilitation is something that I think is incredibly valuable, and something that I also think is extremely important right now to help people kind of cover for each other, care for each other in those facilitative roles. But also just sometimes very, logistically, mechanically, practically, somebody's handling facilitation while somebody else is handling the technology, right? I think a lot of people are doing this now. A lot of people did it before, but it's something that I've realized the importance of more and more during the pandemic crisis. I think we wanted to strike a tone that was, present and inviting for people to participate in ways they were ready to participate. So whether that was silent ether padding, or +1ing or questioning what people put in silent ether padding, or really diving into breakout groups, or really diving into the conversations afterwards. I just want people to kind of be able to show up, to get value without doing a lot of preparation, to feel like they, that it was time well spent together in this community, and that it was time where many folks were able to contribute and to help each other. And we could share what we knew from our experience, but also make sure that there was lots of time and opportunity for others to share what they knew from their experience. In looking back at the feedback that we got, I think that was the absolute right course to take. And there were definitely, even though it was just a 4-week series, you could see, and even though the calls were only 60 minutes, you could see where we made a shortcut here or an affordance there. It really did kind of make a difference from call to call. And the calls that had maybe a lot of content or talking from a Chad were not as effective, I think, as calls that did not.
Yeah. Abby, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. I'll say it is nice that Chad and I have worked together for so long. So we have created that shorthand and we can really quickly spin something up that I don't think we would have been able to 2 years ago, say when we just started working together. We got to know that.
And so that would have been my fault.
I don't know, Chad, but I think that's nice. Just having that sense of collaboration, knowing how we work with each other and how to come to agreement. And I think it's true for any community. Just like over time, you learn how to get to agreements faster. You learn how to work together faster. And that's something we're trying to foster within this like Mozilla MozFest community, because we do want all of you to like work together and do things. It's an aside. But for these calls, this was definitely an experiment, because we had run longer, like 12, 14-week programs that some of you have been a part of. And we had run one-off community calls. But we hadn't done something like this, like a 4-week series. So we wanted to do something that would be actually helpful for the community, wouldn't be too big of a lift for either like us or for you to go to, because I don't think anyone was quite ready to commit to like a 14-week series at the beginning of the pandemic. So this was what we tried, and I think it worked pretty well. Yeah, and we did want that tone of being helpful, but also understanding that like if you can't make all the calls, it's okay. We wanted to make this as accessible as possible. So that's why we have recordings. We had 4 different times for you to join, which was a lot of work for like Chad and myself, but I think it was worth it to get those smaller discussion groups. Yeah, so I think that was good. For some of the other things, yeah, how to convey expectations. Because this was an experiment, we didn't want to set like too high expectations. We were like, come to one, come to none of them, come to all of them, whatever you want. You can choose which one you go to. Watch afterwards. We wanted just to make it as easy as possible. And I think that's different than some of the other things we've run with like that 14-week series. Because we're investing so much in you, we wanted to make sure you were investing that same in us. So we were stricter with expectations compared to this. So I think it depends on what your goals are and who you're aiming with. Yeah, I noticed there's a few other sub-questions. How's this different?
Yeah. Any thoughts on, did you have any disruptive participants or anything like that you had to address?
Not this round that I can think of, but we've had in the past, and I think that's why we make special care, especially for breakout rooms, to remind people that they can press that ask for help button, because it's impossible for us to be in all the breakout rooms at all times. And we do like to open with the CPG each time, just so people know that we do have a code of conduct that we're following, and that it's very clear how to report. So no one's just stuck not knowing what to do. Yeah, we did implement a lot of the Zoom features that Mozilla recommends for security and privacy. So that's why there's a password. It's easy for us to kick people out. Yeah, Chad, anything else that I'm missing?
No, I think that sounds, that's all that describes what we did exactly. I think this time something new that we did, we added kind of those reminders to be kind and not to solutioneer right before every breakout room as well. Because we just want to make sure if you were new to a call, you heard that, both so that you would kind of understand the expectations for those rooms, but also if you're apprehensive about it, you knew the expectations for others as well. And hopefully that gave you some comfort and room to begin a conversation.
Yeah. Well, as an attendee of the series, I feel like this tone and the level of care and intention was definitely felt. So I think y'all succeeded. Jessica, do you want to move on talking about logistics?
Yeah, all right, everyone. So also requested in the community feedback forms, and forgive me if you hear a barking dog in the background, on the community feedback forms was a little more granular detail about the logistics themselves. So I'm going to kick this off with Abby talking a little bit about just the timing. So, you know, this is also a segue from the previous question in some sense, like deciding 4 calls as opposed to 6 or 12, but also how long they were and how you break up the timing within a call. So starting with that one, and then maybe if you have anything that you want to add about other decisions that were made about recording and live streaming and the pros and cons of doing that.
Nice. Yeah, so we picked 4 calls because we thought that's how long it would take us to deliver the content we wanted. That was just a best guess. We hadn't done it before. I think we had slightly more content than we had calls by the end, but it's tricky to figure that out at the beginning. Within the calls, yeah, for each call, I'd say don't go over 90 minutes for an online call. People just get really tired after that. 90 is pushing it a little bit. We stuck with 60 for all of these just to be as lightweight as possible, given the environment we're in. Within a call, I know a lot of people like to trickle in near the beginning. So I like to keep the breakout rooms closer to the second half of the call. That way, I've had this in the past where people join because they joined 5 minutes late, then everyone's in a breakout room. Then I have to send them to breakout room and everyone's confused. I think at most, as much as possible, don't let people join during breakout room time because then they also don't have context around what you're talking about. And I do like opening with hearing from the participants more. I think similar to this idea of letting the participants learn from each other or see insights themselves rather than us just telling it to them. Give that chance first, and then we can share something like a framework or a summary or some of our best practices for them to react to. But this way, it's not all just coming from us, it's coming from more of the participants, then having that breakout room for them to apply it specifically to their communities or their work with support from others. I find that structure generally has worked for us. We've tried a couple others, but that's been nice. We chose to record, again, for that, for people who couldn't make any of the 4 calls, we wanted them to be able to see it. We also had closed captioning turned on the recordings, and that's not something we have capacity to do live. So that way it makes it a little bit more accessible. And also for people who just wanted to be anonymous and didn't want to be in a recording, this way they can watch it afterwards.
That's great. Thank you, Abby. Chad, do you have anything to add in terms of being intentional about how you're using time, both across the series and within a given call?
I think the 60 minutes here was just a really good fit. I think the 4 weeks was a good fit. I think probably were we to do it again, I would push this towards less content, same amount of time instead of more time with the same amount of content. There's also, as I'm sure everyone is keenly aware of, paying attention to the internal calculus of both your organization, your community, but also your own life. And so we really wanted to pitch something we felt that we had capacity to do well, something that fit well with the other work that we were doing, something where people were curious or wanted to continue on with the types of things we talked about with Mozilla. There would be avenues to do that through MozFest and other things that we do with internet health and trustworthy AI. So in addition to thinking about your content and your format, in parallel with those things, or perhaps right before them, really think about what is it that I can do now? What can I give? What do I expect to get back from this? And make sure that value exchange is correct for yourself. So you're not over ambitious, you're over promising and under delivering, or in some way being inauthentic about what it is that you're trying to help people achieve.
Thank you both so much for your responses to that question. And I just to close the loop on the recording, I know it seems like very much a detail, but I just want to draw out Abby's point about consent and recording and live streaming and how that works in conjunction with the communications throughout the course of the series. Just reminding people that would join the 3rd call and not the first 2, what the relationship around privacy and consent is when it comes to recording and live streaming. So Chad, if there's anything else that you wanted to add to that point before we close the loop on that question.
Yeah, so I think always, remind folks which parts of the call will be public and recorded. If you're going to do that, give them an opportunity to opt out of being on camera. Depending on the security settings in your community and kind of your experience with people who might want to, disrupt what you're doing in the past, you might invite people to change their names to things that are more anonymous if those names are going to be displayed in place of profile pictures. One of the reasons that we wanted to make sure that we got out our weekly summary emails with the caption videos and the notes was for people to participate not only asynchronously, but much more anonymously if they wanted to. And when you look at like the number of live participants per week, which was great to see. It was so wonderful to interact with so many people and learn with them. There were many more registrants, and there were, the video views were up a little bit in terms of, compared to just strictly the live participants. Now, maybe one person watched a video 1 million times over the weekend or whatever. Not a million, like, a bunch. But giving people that option to like come to this, asynchronously, anonymously, by sharing all the materials afterwards, I think is important. So enabling, empowering, inviting that kind of participation also relies on really robust documentation. So having the agendas, ready, having good note-taking, inviting community note-taking, all these are ways that, everyone involved with the calls really made it possible for people to participate in exactly the ways that they wanted to.
Building on that, Chad, I'm going to ask a follow-on question, and huge thanks to one of our meeting participants, Sarah. Thank you for your question. Do you have advice, Chad and Abby, on how to improve participation from lower internet bandwidth areas and countries? So question in terms of engaging with the content with Sarah's question, and then also maybe relatedly, how you make decisions about when these are held based on international participation in terms of time zone. So both of those questions together, if you can.
Yeah, I can start.
Okay.
But we tried to schedule the timings apart to cover most of the world. It's very tricky to cover Australia, I've discovered. But usually in Eastern time zone, if we have something at 8 a.m. our time and 5 p.m. our time, that covers most people. They can make at least one of them and then a couple in between. The more popular times tend to be 12 Eastern. So we had a couple of them around then. We found that worked for us for covering time zones. For lower bandwidth areas, sending the recording is usually a lot better on bandwidth than actually joining Zoom. I will say Zoom is better than some of the other options for streaming platforms. And they also have the option to call in by phone, which is nice, which sometimes is good, sometimes isn't, depending on the country. But making sure we have the recordings, we usually were able to get people to participate asynchronously at least. Yeah, Chad, anything to add?
Yeah,
Indonesia.
I think we didn't really discuss this super intentionally or at any length on the calls themselves. And we did in the last week, as we invited in our guests from the Mozilla Corporation, the corporate side of things, they did use some slides. But we most often stick with the agenda and stick with something like Zoom. And I think you could even go to something more like a conference call, but that means not sharing docs and trying to pull those into Zoom and trying to get those, working. Not sharing, not doing notes, not doing an agenda, not sending summaries or of anything like that in a PDF form. I'm sure some of our resources were resource-intense websites and PDFs, which is not ideal. But for the calls themselves, trying to make the actual pieces of documentation that we're using less bandwidth greedy than other things, and not using formats that are particularly inhospitable or inaccessible for folks accessing the calls in different ways. And we're always thankful to hear from people who give us ideas about how to make those things better, about what kind of resources to use and what kind of resources not to use.
Yeah, and I'll say this changes depending on your audience. I will say one of the cohorts we had with Open Leaders, there's someone who had to join by phone with a data connection, and then they weren't able to see the slides unless we shared them in the Zoom. But most cases, it's better the other way. So just like know your audience and who you're trying to reach, and then make changes based on that.
Great responses both, thank you. And thank you so much for your question, Sarah. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Terra to talk a little bit more about the content of the meetings rather than the structure. And I would invite all of you, if you do have follow-up questions about anything we've discussed so far, to follow Sarah's lead and put your question in the chat. We are keeping a lookout.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. So Chad and Abby, we want to move on to talking about the content of the series. So we'll start by talking about how you determined the sort of topic areas for each of the calls. Abby, do you want to start?
Yeah, so the first one was the online meeting tips, and that was basically what we had seen in the blog post, in the Twitter thread that did really well. So we knew there was a lot of demand for that, so we wanted a place to show people this in action. The next two Chad actually came up with around the personal ecology and self-care. Wait, those are the same ones. And community care. Don't forget about your community. But I thought they fit really well with the movement building from home. And it was more than just the logistics of how to connect online and like what platform to use, but really just in this new space, how can we be caring for our communities and ourselves, especially with so much happening online. And then the last one was around, community management. And I thought that was important for just thinking about pathways through your communities and thinking about this more long-term and not just like one-off meetings, but think about how you're going to work with people over time. Chad.
Yeah, I think it was great to start with the online meetings as well, because we were working, Abby, you were working on a blog post about that. We knew that was something that some of our colleagues and fellows and other people, very closely allied with the Mozilla Foundation were curious about as well. It made a lot of sense to start there. The first thing you want to do is find a safe, effective way to get people together to pursue that mission that they have together. And then, after that, as Abby said, we thought about community care and personal ecology. Those are very much like things I like to think about, very much have to do with like open culture, culture change, things like that. So I was very happy that we included them. And I think we wanted to make sure, along with online community management, right, they were represented, they were valued, they were front and center in terms of weekly topics. Because I think that's part of our argument about what it means to be together online now, before, after. It's not just about the platforms or project management. It's about the ways that you use those platforms and instill your project management with care and balance for yourself and others.
Yeah, I think that's really right on. So the next question is about learning objectives and outcomes for attendees for this series. So Chad, do you want to start by talking a little bit about that and how you sort of assessed qualitatively the success of this series?
Yeah, we had, as Abby said, this was kind of like an experiment, and we wanted this to be very kind of like light touch in terms of what we were asking for. We were hoping to provide a lot of value at a relatively low price of admission, which was, spend an hour of your time with us each week, as we spend time with lots of people in this community who are interested in the same things you are, talking about those things together. We hope that would be a good value exchange. I think for the most part, it worked out. Some weeks too much content, some weeks not enough breakout rooms, but overall, I think a lot of our bets paid off. And like the affective experience of being present together, caring about these things together and caring about each other, for me, was really the goal of these calls, right? It was not the same thing as Abby was saying, like a program like Open Leaders, where we've got these 14 weeks together. We have a very kind of like detailed and granular syllabus meant to help people work through an open project, both in terms of its outcomes, its community. There's a lot to do there. And we want to make sure that we can support people in programs like that in achieving all of those outcomes. Like that's part of the expectation. Here, the expectation was really, can we be helpers right now, right? Can we be helpers on the internet? And looking at kind of like the feedback we got on those weekly surveys, thank you all so much for doing those. Looking at folks' interest in a call like this one, I think the calls were successful in reaching that goal, just bringing people together to care about online communities and to care for one another as we did this work.
Just to add on the assessment piece, we did use the Net Promoter Score. If you notice that, how likely would you recommend this to friends or colleagues on each of the surveys? And that's sort of how, because we ask this regularly around MozFest and Open Leaders, and it's sort of how we're measuring the value of our work to you, or just how how much value you found in it that you're willing to recommend it to someone else. So we keep track of that over time. And and I think we got a pretty high score for this. So thank you all for rating that. And and we also use that number to justify like doing more things like this. So thanks for filling out that survey. It really helps us justify our work internally.
Nice. So I also want to ask you both how you went about setting agendas and discussion questions for each of the meetings. Abby, do you want to start?
Sure. So Chad actually put together the template agenda that we started off with for most of them. And then usually what we do is the day before our first call on Mondays, we'd have a little chat, and then we'd go through and then we'd modify them to better suit that specific topic. We'd change the prompts. Crowdsourcing agendas and discussion questions. Yeah. Did we do much crowdsourcing? I guess we had asked people what they wanted a little bit, but this was more Chad and I sitting and deciding what the prompt should be and just modifying it.
Yeah. That I think that's accurate. I think like the feedback piece was probably more about like which structures within each call really work for you. Let's make sure that we engage with each topic in that way in the future. But we chose the topics. Again, kind of like based on what we were seeing other organizations doing, where our own areas of expertise were, and where we, hoped, suspected, and wanted to invite in community expertise as well. And there was another piece I was trying to think of here. Oh, I think also like, again, in line with that kind of like habit, that practice of team facilitation and developing that relationship over time. I think we both also roughly had ideas where, someone wanted to be the quote unquote like lead or whatever on a particular agenda. We would make sure to kind of talk about all the prompts and come to consensus, but also like defer like I think this question is probably a better question than this one given the amount of time we have. Like if that was your week, if that was your topic, if that was the thing where you were kind of the lead, absolutely, the other person just leaves that decision up to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we would adjust prompts and questions a little bit based on the feedback. So I think we did see people wanted to hear more about what each other was working on. So we tried to add that in like the opening prompt. So little tweaks like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So we have just 1 or 2 minutes to talk about this, but where would you take the series from here? And how would you like to build on the series of discussions about virtual facilitation and organizing, especially during the times that we're in? Abby, do you want to go first?
Actually, I think this is Chad's domain.
This is Chad's domain. Chad.
Yes, well, directly after this call, let's take this conversation right to the MozFest Slack. But no, seriously. My hope is that folks found some, really maybe surprising or delightful personal connections where now they're contributing to someone's project or in a book club or find themselves in a Slack community with somebody that maybe they never expected to be talking to about community management, community care, personal ecology. I also hope that we've gotten maybe, we've invited people to see themselves as part of the internet health movement, or as part of building more trustworthy AI, or as someone who's kind of interested in like, oh, how does Mozilla do this? Why do they care about this? Why did they bring this together? How does this show up in their other work? And I noticed it's a question later on, so I won't say too much about that now. Apart from, I really think developing all the habits and practices we're developing now, right? Building on them if we practiced them before, figuring them out if they are new to us. These are things we should take forward, after the crisis moment has passed, or maybe just at least lessened, right? And the things that work really well now will continue to work really well. And the people that have just joined us, we want to keep them with us. We want to stay with them. And so part of my hope is, I think maybe, everyone who's doing this work, who in some ways been part of this community or can invite others to it, might think of themselves as part of a solution to what is a perpetual internet health issue, which is just digital inclusion, or maybe like openness and decentralization. right? This is a community of people all around the world who have enough care to want to share openly with one another how to be together to accomplish, shared goals, local goals with global impact or global input and feedback. And so I'm hoping maybe people realize, like, I am part of this internet health movement. I am part of the solution to making the internet a healthier, better place for people. I am part of work to do digital inclusion, openness, and decentralization, or sharing power, better than people have in the past.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Abby, do you want to add anything?
Just real quickly, I know so many people on this call are leaders in your own movements, in your own communities. And so many of you are already doing work for a healthier internet. So we just want to make sure you have the tools and the skills you need to keep that going. So we hope this series helped. And we hope that it'll be a resource for people afterwards.
I think it definitely will be. So we're going to move on now to talking through some questions from the chat. And I'm going to hand it over to Jessica to go through some of these.
All right, thanks so much, Tara, and Abby and Chad. Great conversation so far. So huge thanks to those of you that have provided questions in the chat. I'm going to go directly to Gavin's question. How much offline time did it take to prepare for the calls, roughly? It looks like you may have approached this. I know that you mentioned in the last answer to your question, or one of Tara's questions, that you took sort of the hour to review the agenda each week. But if there's any additional time that you spent outside of those Zoom calls, those preparatory Zoom calls together, could the two of you speak to that?
Yeah,
You can go.
We've put a lot of things together, so I don't think we needed as much time discussing. We did a lot of async work. Well, Chad did a lot of async work, like setting up the agendas, putting together like the rough curriculum. And then we would meet each week. And before the first call and after that first call, I think we would make changes on the fly a little bit. But yeah, I'd say at least 30 minutes for each week that we did, and then a little bit more based on whether or not we needed to make adjustments later on. And at the very beginning, we met maybe once or twice, I'd say, Chad. I don't really remember. At least twice.
Yeah, probably a couple hours roughing out the agendas, a couple of 30 to 60-minute meetings to kind of go over them, make sure they were doing what we wanted them to do, figuring out the division of labor. And then, Abby did a lot with templating and automating communications, registrations, things like that. So that's time that we should also consider.
Yeah, we did a lot of async work for like writing the emails, but then getting each other to review it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd also like to draw attention, since Bara is on the call, and I think you have some other colleagues from Mozilla who are helping with the AV and live streaming. That might be something else to address within Gavin's question, if you don't mind, Gavin, just to stretch that out, which is in terms of coordinating with the AV team at Mozilla. Just maybe speak a little bit to what's involved in that, or how many other colleagues were involved in making these calls happen.
Right. So I would fill in a form with the ServiceNow request. Well, actually, first I would ping Andy to make sure I understand which form to fill out. Then I'd fill out the form. For the regular calls, we didn't have the live streaming. So what would happen, Andy would just get the recording and then put it on YouTube afterwards. So it was a little bit less labor intensive for the IT folks, I think. But on this call, since we are live streaming, we have Bara and Jalen here to set that all up so it's connected both to Air Mozilla and to YouTube. So if you want to watch anonymously, you can do that there. We wanted to save it for this special bonus episode. We didn't want to do it for each one. And within Open Leaders, we would usually do the live streaming just for the final projects, that big finale that we wanted everyone to come to. Who else? Yeah, those are people involved. I don't know if Jalen or Bara wants to say anything.
I would say we are always happy to help, and there's many of my colleagues also can help with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for answering that question. Great question, Gavin. Let's see. So we also have Definitely mindful of the time, and we're about 3 minutes till our closing circle. Let's see. So Aaron has a question. This is a great question. How does this fit into just the bigger picture? And Abby, you touched on this actually, that the feedback form and the score that you use in terms of asking people whether or not they would recommend this programming to a colleague or a friend, it gets at this a little bit in terms of internal justification to do a project like this. But yeah, maybe if you could both speak briefly to how this fits in, and both of you touched on this in terms of, Chad brought this up multiple times, you're sort of conceptualizing of the whole series, not only in terms of what you want to talk about, but how closely it aligns with the work that you two are already doing. So maybe just put a finer point on that question, which is, you know, a couple more words about how it fits into the bigger picture of what you're doing programmatically at Mozilla.
Yeah, I can start a little bit. This was also part of our COVID response. So Mozilla released a few things in response to COVID. Some of it was like the Zoom audits. I know IT worked on this a little bit, and talking about like how to stay private and secure using Zoom. And this was one of them. Like, now that we're all meeting online, what can you do? So this was our way of being helpful in this space and showing that even though a lot of things have stopped, like the internet health is more important now than ever. Just so many of us are relying on the internet. We need to keep working to make sure it stays healthy and that we can still be collaborating openly on this. So these calls were one of the ways we were doing that. Yeah, your scores really helped show that we were actually meeting a need and we were actually showing value to what the community wants right now. And it also fits strategically with the next piece. Chad mentioned how like MozFest is pushed back a few months. So we have been thinking about how to engage longer term with the community outside of that week-long festival. So this was a nice way to test a way to engage people that's not just one call, and it's not 14 weeks of calls, but like something in between. So this was a great learning for us there. Chad, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, like, in terms of how we conceptualize our own mountain of engagement, you all are very far up along it already. You've spent a lot of time with us, a lot of time with each other. You're sharing resources. It's fantastic. You know, I think to kind of sustain that level of engagement, or to find another level of engagement where, you know, maybe you want to observe what we're up to or see what the community is up to, or maybe you want to get more deeply involved, things like the Slack and the newsletter are fantastic. So, you know, it is like our hope that you will remain active on Slack and ask questions there and answer questions there and affirm each other there and share your work there. It is our hope that you'll sign up for the newsletter. So, like, if you want to learn more about MozFest when it's time for more announcements and for the call for proposals to come up, you'll know exactly when those things are, and you'll know people in the community that you can ask questions about those things, you know, directly. You know, and maybe submit a proposal to MozFest based on what you've seen, what you've learned about digital inclusion, openness, decentralization in your own journey. Consider attending, you know, MozFest in either of those scenarios, either as a facilitator or as a newcomer or just as someone coming back to the community. We hope that, you know, knowing people, knowing familiar and friendly folks makes it easy to engage with opportunities like that, or easier. Just that, you know, you have a place to chat about things, ask questions about things, and explore what you and your community might do next in this moment.
And as a perfect follow-on or segue, Anisha's question is specifically about sustaining the community long-term. And Chad, you just discussed different modes of communication where people can continue to build on whatever communication was had in the chat document on on the notes document on previous calls, or people that spoke up and offered something up vocally on the call. But are there other ways of sustaining these discussions? So for people that maybe are not the biggest fans of Slack and chat rooms for engaging with their colleagues, what are some other sort of modes or formats that might be ways of building off of this series, for example?
Go ahead, Chad.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I was just going to say, so there will be like longer term forms of engagement as well that we're developing now that will be shared soon, that may or may not be a fit for you, your community, or your organization or your project. I think probably newsletter or Slack, you know, is probably the best way just to learn about those opportunities, but not necessarily to participate in them there. They might have other programmatic elements. You know, MozFest, that process, you know, possibilities for remote participation, you know, that's a kind of a rallying point in the internet health movement, both a launch pad, but also a milestone, a way marker in folks' journeys throughout the year that I encourage people to explore and get involved with in some way. You know, I think there's also, if you're working in this space, if you are thinking of your work as connected to it, if you are curious about it, you know, there's always time for a quick chat as well with, you know, with our team, with Abby or me, with folks that you might find on Slack. You don't have to have the chat there, but maybe if you've created some strong connections in this community, Slack can be a place to check in with each other and see if there's a, you know, a way to have maybe a different kind of chat or to contribute to each other's work differently after that. But just maintaining a presence, even if it's just to stay aware of what's happening next. So when that next invitation that works for you comes along, you can grab it.
Yeah, and just looking at, sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
I just want to say, just in case this is already in place, are there places on the Mozilla Foundation website where people interested in specific topical areas, say like a built-in forum, so things outside of the Slack application, but other places where people can tune in around topical areas or form working groups? Is there infrastructure on the existing foundation website for that?
We do have a discourse for chatting and organizing. For more other ways to organize, stay tuned and see what might be coming. Take a look at that newsletter in Slack. And just, I wanted to add to Anisha's question around what works well in terms of sustaining community long-term. I think I really do love the mountain of engagement for this. Just thinking about ways to deepen engagement with your community over time. I think, yeah, Chad did great work putting together a current iteration of that mountain. But thinking about how people can go up that mountain really keeps them engaged. So they're not just doing the same thing and then leaving.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Chad and Abby. This has been so much fun. It's been a pleasure for Terra and I to be here with all of you, speaking to all the participants on the call today and members of the community. We're right at 2, so we just wanted to point in the closing circle section of the meeting agenda to several recommendations and resources. These are community organizing resources, some community governance templates, some facilitation techniques and exercises, love session lab, love community rule. All of these are favorites of ours over at Educopia. And then Abby and Chad have also added links to the Rockwood Leadership Institute that they discussed several times, and some more resources for leading online. So if you have resources you want to share with everyone, please do feel free to add them into this section. And otherwise, I'll just say again, huge thanks to all of you for allowing us to be in community with you today.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.